It is 7:10 at News Radio 1040 WHO. Good evening to all of you who've joined us. On behalf of all of us here at WHO Radio, we want to welcome you to the first face-to-face debate between the two people who want to represent Northwest Iowa in Congress in the newly drawn 4th Congressional District. Now, this program is going to be kind of a job interview of sorts. We're going to give you, the listeners, which really are the hiring managers, some insights on these two prospective employees. So you can decide who you'll pick in the November election. Now, whoever wins this race is going to have a long drive to get through all of the 39 counties that lie between the boundaries, and there's a diverse constituency to serve as well, from the moderate to liberal college town of Ames to what's been a pretty rock-solid conservative farm base in western Iowa. And our candidates, well, they come from two distinctly different backgrounds. KING-VILSACK, born in Mount Pleasant, Iowa. She met her future husband, Tom Vilsack, while the two were attending college in upstate New York. And Wikipedia told me, and I hope this is true, that you apparently the man who's now our USDA secretary came up to KING-VILSACK in the cafeteria, asked, "Are you a Humphrey or Nixon supporter?" And she said Humphrey. And well, they ended up getting married in 1973, have two sons, Jess and Doug, two grandchildren. They moved back to Mount Pleasant. She became a librarian and a teacher, teaching middle school and high school language arts and journalism, and also working as a reporter for the local newspaper, and has a master's degree in journalism from the University of Iowa. And, of course, we all remember her when her husband was sworn in as governor in 1999. KING-VILSACK made her term as Iowa's first lady, one there where she focused on education and literacy issues. In 2007, she also founded the Iowa Initiative, a private foundation with the goal of reducing the rate of unintended pregnancies by Iowa women between the ages of 18 and 30. She left that in order to begin her efforts toward the Democratic congressional campaign, and we welcome you here to WHO, Mrs. Vilsack.
Thanks. It's great to be here, and thanks for having me, Gary.
Now, the other major party choice, because there is someone on the ballot that is nominated by petition, but the Republican on the ballot is the Republican Steve King. He's been a congressman representing the western part of the state since 2002, member of the Small Business Committee, and also the House Judiciary Committee. You sit on the Constitution and the Immigration subcommittees. Before that, he served in the Iowa Senate for 6 years. There he was chairman of the State Government Committee. And from what I understand, you grew up in a law enforcement family in Storm Lake, attended Denison Community High School. Have some friends in Denison, so I know exactly where that's at. That's where you met your wife, Marilyn, and you married her in 1972 and have been together for 38 years. You began King Construction in 1975, and that's a business that still is around. Your oldest son now operating that, as I understand. And you have 3 grown sons, 5 grandchildren. Is that right?
Yes.
So thank you for taking part in the debate, Congressman. We appreciate
Well, thank you, Gary. Thanks for setting this up. And I just would amend that part there. Marilyn and I celebrated 40 years of marriage this summer. And we did so with Terry and Chris Branstad, who were married exactly on the same day.
Oh,
so
wow.
We've all lived the American dream.
Didn't plan that, though, did you?
No, we didn't. He reminds me that was the date of the Watergate break-in. So he has an alibi, and so do I.
Okay. Well, it's time to get to know the two of you better. So let's start with your own statements about yourself and your campaign. It's kind of your campaign commercial. We decided this by a coin toss, of all things, we do in these debates. So we're starting with KING-VILSACK.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. Thanks to WHO. I'm an Iowan. I'm a homegrown Iowan, and my parents brought me home from the hospital to a home that didn't have running water, but by the time I was 3 years old, we were living in a home that was made possible by the GI Bill. 2 weeks before I graduated from high school, my mother died of cancer. But she made sure before she died that my dad promised that he wouldn't stand in the way of my dream, which was to go to upstate New York to start a new college for women. So I'd like to dedicate this debate to my parents, to my mom, who knew I needed to leave, and to my dad, who invited me back. In 1974, I was teaching in a small town in upstate New York, putting Tom through law school, making $7,000 a year, and teaching in a little town where they grew potatoes and Brussels sprouts. And we were trying to figure out where we wanted to live for the rest of our life when a letter came from my dad on a piece of yellow legal tablet. Most of the decisions of my life have been made on yellow legal tablets, and that letter said at the top, here's the job for Tom. If he wants to come back and join me in the practice of law, here's the job for you. And so we made that decision, and we've never regretted it. But I think that everybody in this district, everybody in this state should be able to write that letter to their children and their grandchildren, and to invite them back or to invite them to stay here to begin with and not even leave. But you can't write that letter unless there's a job. And my dad included that job at the top of the page. So I have one reason for running for Congress. I'm running because I want to make sure that people can continue to live in small towns and small cities in these 39 counties. And I have a plan for how we can make sure that we create layers of economic opportunity and that we can invite our children and our grandchildren, or look them in the eye and invite them to stay here. And my plan involves 3 different principles. It involves education, which is the keystone of our democracy, and we can use education basically to build the workforce. It involves innovation, because we need to build on what we've already done here in Iowa over the last 14, 15 years, and that is our very strong bioeconomy, our bio-based economy. Although I think that we can extend that, and we can create the small businesses that will take the next step in a bio-based economy and rely on the raw materials that surround our small towns and cities. And third, it's about connection. And connection is about building roads, finishing Highway 20, making sure we repair bridges, and making sure that we have short rail and that we connect every small town in this district to high-speed internet, so people don't feel personally, socially isolated, and so they can continue to build and be entrepreneurs. So I want to go to Washington to be a problem solver, not a partisan fighter, and I want to invite all of the people of this district to join me in solving the problems that we need to solve in order to create layers and layers of economic opportunity. You know, I was at the Greene County Fair this summer, and a man came up to me and he said, you know, I'm not a Democrat and I'm not a Republican, I'm an American, and I wish Congress would start acting like they're Americans too. So I'm proud to be an Iowan, and I'm proud to be an American, and I'm ready to go to Congress to act like an American in Congress as well. So in order to do that, I need the votes from the people of this district, and I humbly ask for them. And I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And Congressman King.
Well, thank you, Gary. And, you know, for my background, which is the place to start on this discussion, as you said in the introduction, but I went to college at Northwest Missouri State in Maryville, Missouri, and I worked construction in the summertime. And I came back, and I was signed up to go up on the pipeline in Alaska we had 600 miles of right-of-way from Fairbanks north. The court injunction shut that down, and it took a few years. Marilyn and I got married in the meantime, and when I had the opportunity to go up there when it was opened up by an act of Congress, I might add, she said, well, do you like being married? And I did, and of course stayed down here, and then later on started the business from scratch. We had a negative net worth of $5,000. Marilyn was 1 credit hour short of being able to be certified to teach in Iowa, and we couldn't afford to send her back to South Dakota for that whole semester for 1 credit hour, so she was waiting tables for tips down at the steakhouse, and I was running a bulldozer. And one day I came home and said, today I'm a man. And she looked at me with that bored look. Well, what else is new? Well, it really was new. It was new that I understood that I needed to take charge of our lives and start building for our future. We had no prospects of a family at the time, at least I didn't think. And a couple months later, I'd started a business and borrowed 100% to buy an old beaten-up bulldozer. And on the same day that I came home with having made the deal that was starting the business, Marilyn interrupted my presentation and pointed out to me that she's pregnant. That was news to me, and our family began, for as far as I was concerned, the same day that the business began. And so through those times, we had our ups and downs. And when I think about the statement, you didn't build that, well, maybe not, but I was just joking today. It wasn't just me alone. It was Marilyn standing on the tracks of that old D7, 4.5 months pregnant, in the rain, torquing the head bolts. We built that from scratch, from a hole, $5,000 in the hole, up to a company that's now, it's been its 37th year. Actually, beginning its 38th year. My oldest son owns that company today. All of our children, we have 3 grown sons, they live within 10 miles of our house. Our neighbors during the 80s and the farm crisis raised their children to leave home and go get an education and don't look back. And then they would buy a plane ticket to go visit their grandchildren. We raised our children to create opportunities here, and they're all entrepreneurs in their own right. We have 3 wonderful daughters-in-law and 5 grandchildren, all who flow to our place after church on Sundays and spill out over the deck and fight over the rope swing. And that's as good as it gets in my life. And I've had the privilege to go to Washington and fight for those values that give people opportunities to earn their prosperity. That means low taxes, low regulations, getting government out of our lives rather than the nanny state that gets into our lives. That's, I think, the distinction in this campaign. And I'm looking forward to the questions that we have and the discussion that we have going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, let's start out the interview the way that most human resource managers do. I'm going to ask some questions that really don't deal with political issues. We'll have time for that, of course. But this is more about motivations and goals. And I guess the first question, I'll start with you, Mrs. Vilsack. The question is, I hear people ask this about politicians all the time. Why do you want this job? What's so important about being a member of Congress from a rural state and a rural district? What gives you what motivated you to step up and say, I'm running?
Well, I think I said it before, and I'll say it again many times because I've said it all over the district, and that is that I'm really running for one reason, and that's to make sure that we can continue to live in small towns and small cities in the future. And this district, with Sioux City on the west, is an agricultural processing center, with Ames on the east, which is the research arm of agriculture, and in between is every small town you can possibly imagine. And this is the richest agricultural space in the world. We produce more corn, more beans, more hogs, more eggs, more ethanol, more cellulosic ethanol. We're going to have 2 of the first 3 cellulosic ethanol plants, 2,000 of the 3,000 wind turbines in Iowa. I want to make sure that we create layers of economic opportunity here. And my view of this job is very local. I think Congressman King's view of the job is quite a bit different than the way I see the job. I think he sees the job as a way to basically promote himself and a way to be on TV and talk to people and promote an ideology that really has very little to do with the economic opportunities that we need to be building in these small towns. And so, he's on television a lot and he talks a lot, but I hear a lot of talk and no action. And frankly, I'd like to say to Congressman King that all that talk, some of it is actually offensive to people in Iowa. And frankly, he's been a bully and he's an embarrassment to the people of Iowa when he talks about immigrants as animals. And if my mother were here, she'd say to Congressman King, show some common decency.
So, Congressman King, I'll let you respond to that, but also really, what makes you stay in the office? Why to run again?
First I would say, my mother would say, show some common decency at this point, too. And what makes me stay in office is that I'm driven to protect America from the hardcore movement of the left that's undermining American dream. The pillars of American exceptionalism are under assault from the hardcore left. Everything that you can name in the Bill of Rights that is a pillar, freedom of speech, religion and the press, assembly, the right to keep and bear arms, tried by it, all of that, and property rights are under assault from the left. Free enterprise as well. This American vigor that we have that comes from legal immigrants who came to this country with a dream. We got the cream of the crop of every donor civilization on the planet. And people that can take a compliment and turn it into an insult are not going to be constructive working across the aisle. But that's what that was a compliment, and everyone who was there that heard that knows that. And we need to focus on these issues. But I've been also engaged in the ag issues. For example, the very first bill that I introduced as a freshman member of Congress created the blender's credit for biodiesel, and it extended the blender's credit for ethanol, and it became the foundation for the renewable fuels industry in this state and in the country. And today I represent the 5th District of Iowa, the 32 counties in western Iowa, and it is the #1 renewable fuels congressional district out of all 435 in America. That didn't happen by accident. It would not have happened without my legislation, but I'm not here to take the credit for it. It was the risk takers, the capital investors, the people that created the industry. And just the other night I shook the hand of Thurman Gaskell, that was the hand that squeezed the nozzle to pump the first gallon of ethanol here in the United States, and it was in 1978. It's been a long, hard slog to get here. We've created a lot, but the prosperity that we have enjoyed is the result of a lot of things: risk-taking capital, trying to get government out of the way, trying to reduce the intrusiveness of the federal government. And I don't want to go back from that. I think our job is let people have their freedom and let them use their individual responsibilities to grow and strengthen families and life and marriage and free enterprise and farms and businesses and communities. And by the way, the very best thing that has come along for small communities in Iowa, around 950 of them, has been renewable fuels. And I'm fortunate that I've been in the middle of that for a long, long time.
Now, what she characterized as showmanship, I guess, have been you've been sort of the go-to guy for the media on conservative issues. When somebody needs to have an interview about a conservative cause, Steve King is there to weigh in on it. Is that showmanship, and how do you view your job in the global versus the issues for your district?
Well, that is my job. My job is to carry a message. It would be easy, a lot easier. It's not easy. Any service that you have in Congress is not easy, but it would be a lot easier to just simply vote your district, avoid the controversy, stay down below the line of fire, spend all your time trying to get reelected. But that's not my job. My job is to move our Iowa agenda in the nation. And what that takes is convincing people outside the district that they need to change their position, maybe change their member of Congress. And so what I've seen happen is when I get some people sometimes to sign on to a bill that's good for the whole country, and I've had them come back afterwards and say, well, take my name off of that, or take their name off of it and not say so. And I'm wondering why. And I drill through that, and it's the staff listening to the constituents. And finally, I wonder, why am I making arguments just in committee here in Washington, D.C.? Why don't I go make arguments in places like California, in New York, in Massachusetts, in Colorado, in Texas, and Mississippi, and on? Make those arguments through syndicated radio, through television, through every media possible, because it's about moving the Iowa agenda in the nation.
Could I respond to that, please?
Okay.
Well, Congressman, when you get on television, you don't talk about Iowa. You talk about ideologies that have nothing to do with creating economic opportunity in Iowa. You have multiple times referred to immigrants as animals, and that's not how we talk to people in Iowa.
And that's not
true. But let me visit the issue of blender credits and ethanol. You try to take credit for the blender credits, but that actually had been proposed in several years before you proposed that bill. In fact, I don't think you've passed a bill except for one that named a post office in the 10 years that you've been in Congress. And so I also want to point out that you haven't been consistent in your support of ethanol or your support of wind. And there have been many times when you have voted against both wind and ethanol in this state. And I think you have to be responsible for your record in Congress. You like to hold yourself out as a champion, but in fact, I don't think you have been. I think you've been very inconsistent. When I go to Congress, I'm going to be a champion every day for wind, for ethanol, for cellulosic ethanol, and for all of those people who have been left out of what should be the Farm Bill. But the bill that you passed out of the Agriculture Committee basically left out the energy titles. So I think that's pretty inconsistent when it comes to supporting renewable fuels in Iowa.
I'd be real happy to yield some of my time to the gentle lady from Mount Pleasant to quote me verbatim from an original source and identify the bills that she claims support the statement that she's just made.
We'll be happy to do that later.
Why don't you do it now?
Excuse me, sir.
You've made the allegation now. Why don't you do that now?
First of all, I'm not from Mount Pleasant. I'm from Ames. Recently, you've suggested that I haven't moved into the district, but that would be a surprise to the people who see me at Rotary on Mondays and to the people at the public library and the people in my neighborhood that I meet out on the green. So just to be clear, I'm not from Mount Pleasant. I was born and raised in Mount Pleasant, but I'm a resident of Ames.
Okay, I'm going to move on to a question that has to do with what we did at the Iowa State Fair here at WHO Radio. We had a poll, a very unscientific poll, but the responses were very interesting because we asked them to go to a computer, kind of like in a ballot box. Nobody could really see you, and then answer some questions. And one of the things we asked them to do is to rank issues in order of importance in this election. 57% said the economy was the top issue. 18% said it was health care. 8% said it was jobs. 4% said it was abortion. And 3% said gay marriage. So, Mrs. Vilsack, do you agree that those priorities are ranked properly? And if not, what would be your top 5 list?
Well, when I traveled around the district at the beginning doing a listening tour, I wanted to find out what was on people's minds and what they said over and over again. It wasn't so much about, it was certainly about the economy. And in some places in the district, it was about jobs. On the western side, unemployment is about 2%. On the eastern side, especially after Electrolux left Webster City, it was like 5%. A lot of states would love to have that kind of an unemployment rate. But what people told me was that they wanted to be able to invite their children to stay here or to come back. And so that's really been at the heart of my campaign and what I want to do every day in Washington. And when I go to Congress, I want to redefine the job of congressperson, and I want to make sure that I'm out there every day talking to people about bringing economic opportunity to the communities of my district, of connecting people from one side of the district to the other, but also to people around the country where I might open doors for economic development. So it is about the economy, but for me, it's local. It's all about the local. And Congressman King basically said in an interview with the Sioux City Journal that if he had only had to deal with the issues of the 4th District, that he'd have time to go fishing. Well, I want to make it a full-time job, and I want to educate people, and I want to bring opportunity here.
So do you want to go fishing?
I don't have the patience to go fishing anymore. I'm much too animated, and so if somebody sentenced me to 3 days of fishing, I couldn't take it, Gary. But my point is this, that there are a lot of issues that affect the United States of America, and it would be irresponsible to go to Congress and only address those issues that affect the district that you came to represent. This is not an America with a giant mosaic of 435 congressional districts, each one of them just going there to focus only on those issues that have to do with inside the borders of those districts. This is an entire country, and it's the unchallenged greatest nation in the world. We have a foreign policy to be concerned about. We have a broad national economy to be concerned about. And I would add this, that it is not a conflict between what's good for Iowa, what's good for the 5th or the 4th District, or what's good for the United States of America. They are compatible. And I will tell you my priorities are God, country, state, district, and they're never in conflict, have not been in all the time that I've served in the Iowa Senate, nor in the United States Congress. And so I'd point out also that we have a significant amount of prosperity here in comparison to the rest of the country. Looking at Iowa's unemployment rate that has been most of the time underneath 5%, just bumped above that here in the last report that I saw. But looking at the wealth that's been created here in Iowa and the time that it happens to be coincidental, I've got this data by my district director from 2002 on. The value of crops and livestock sold in Iowa in 2002 was $12 billion. In 2008, $24 billion. It had doubled. The value of ag land in 2002 was $60 billion. The value of ag land 9 years later, that's when I've got the data, went over $200 billion. We have increased our capital foundation just in ag land values in the state of Iowa by $140 billion in the course of 9 years. We have a lot of capital to bridge us through these hard times. And I did stand in Sioux City and gave a speech 4 years ago about right now when I said that however bad this downward spiral gets in our economy, and that was in the middle of the highest level of anxiety about global credit and currency. And by the way, that's another international issue that a member of Congress better be paying attention to. So however bad this gets, we will weather it as well as anyone, because we're close to the land from which comes all new wealth. We're close to our families. We're close to our churches. We're close to our neighborhoods, and we're close to our educational systems that we have. That was a speech 4 years ago. It holds up well today when you look at what we've gone through, a downward economic spiral and a drought. And we're going to come out the other side of this strong and stable. That says a lot about Iowans and their prudence and their opportunities that they've had in the past.
Could I add on to that a little bit?
Okay.
Well, I'd like to know right now what the most important thing is to the people in this district is a farm bill. And Congressman King hasn't been able to deliver a farm bill. And it's not just a farm bill, it's a farm, food, and jobs bill. And it's really, really important. He's talking about the value of land. And my dad told me many years ago that if the farmers are doing well, we're all doing well. And that was true then, and it's true now. But we are so efficient, the farmers are so efficient that we don't need quite as many of them. And so that means that our main streets have been hurt. And we need to create layers and layers and layers of economic opportunity in our small towns in order to make them to continue to be viable. But Congressman King not only hasn't delivered a farm bill and hasn't shown leadership on the farm bill, but he also, in the farm bill that passed out of the Agriculture Committee in the House, left out the rural development title. And so that's all the money for small schools, for small hospitals, for police stations, for fire departments, for libraries, for first-time homeowners in small towns. And so why have we not seen leadership, and why have we not seen movement on the most important piece of legislation for rural people, not only in Iowa, not only in the 4th District, but across this country?
Well, I can let Congressman King respond. We are at the point where we're supposed to be asking, each candidate is supposed to ask each other a question. Would you like that to be your question?
That would be fine. That would be my question.
Okay.
And I hope he can tell me, because he's had the opportunity to lead. And if he were truly a leader, he'd be sitting on John Boehner's doorstep, knocking on his door. Or he could walk down to the well and basically sign the petition that Bruce Braley put there that would force Speaker Boehner to take the Farm Bill to a vote. Because one of his colleagues, a Republican from Arkansas, has done just that in a bipartisan fashion.
Congressman King, I'll let you answer.
Well, here's a few things that I think that the Iowa public and the American public has been misinformed on. One of them is Bruce Braley has no discharge petition. There would be a PDF file of that on the internet somewhere if he had a discharge petition. There are no signatures on it. If he or the Secretary or Mrs. Vilsack or anybody in Congress that's on the Democrat side of the aisle wants to move a farm bill, the best thing they could do is get a letter to John Boehner, get 100 Democrat signatures on there so we could actually have a bipartisan bill coming out of the House, and then we could get something done. But right now it's being blocked because of, I believe, a partisan division that's taking place, and I think the disagreement, if you want to take it down to a policy part of this, is Republicans want to reform food stamps. The SNAP program has gone from around 19 million people on food stamps to the clearest number that I've had that I think is reliable is 44.7. I've seen numbers go as high as 47 million people. They're running advertisements to advertise to get more people to sign up for food stamps. We think that when people are bailing themselves out of jail with an EBT card, and when you have people that are going into tattoo parlors or advertising in neon lights that they take EBT cards for tattoos, we've got to reform that program. So there are a number of things that we do disagree on, but I'm for the House-passed version of the Farm Bill. I don't hear a position taken by Mrs. Vilsack on that at all. And by the way, I don't hear a position from the Secretary of Agriculture on it either. I was looking forward to working with the department on this. I haven't seen that happen, but we've worked for over a year to put this Farm Bill together. Our staff has worked with committee staff, and we wrote a lot of changes into that. We passed it out of committee with bipartisan support, only 11 no votes, and it was Democrats and Republicans, and it should come to the floor in September. I am working for that. There are 435 people there, and Chairman Lucas wants this done as badly as I do, and I don't think I'd call him ineffective either. One
thing that maybe our listeners don't realize, and the last figures that I remember was about 75% of the Farm Bill is food stamps or the SNAP program and food and nutrition programs. So that's a big chunk of getting it passed. So if there is that difference of opinion about food and nutrition programs being a part of the Farm Bill, what do you think about getting your Democratic colleagues to help work together to forge some kind of a compromise or to pull out that from the farm legislation? We have a compromise. It's called the Senate version of the bill. It's a really good version. They got it passed. It's one of the only things that happened this year in the Congress that showed bipartisanship, and it was passed. The House could not pass their version. And Congressman, this morning in the paper, it said that hunger among children in Iowa, food insecurity among people in this state is up by 4%. Basically what the Farm Food and Jobs Act does is it funds SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Program. It funds WIC, Women, Infants, and Children, and it also funds school lunches. We have a moral obligation to take care of the people who are hungry in this country. But the other thing about this is that for every SNAP dollar, 14 cents of that dollar goes into the pocket of a farmer. The money that comes from SNAP to our farmers in this district is more than the direct payments. And so it's huge. And also that money circulates through the communities. And so it's actually being spent. So
I would suggest that a colleague of the congressman's has signed the petition that Bruce Braley put out and has said he wants to work in bipartisan spirit. And I certainly wish that the Congress could work in the same bipartisan spirit that the Senate did, because they came up with a pretty good bill.
There is no discharge petition, and no one would call a Senate bill a compromise.
Now it's your turn to ask a question.
Oh, okay. Well, I really, I guess I'll say that I'm a little surprised here the way things have gone, and so I'm just trying to formulate a question. I'm a little caught off balance. I don't really know what to ask you, Christy, but would you just name 3 things that you agree with me on? That would be very helpful, because I'm starting to wonder if it's just lined up against me because that's the case for this campaign, or is there something philosophically? 3 things that you say philosophically we would agree on, that we could get in a room and talk about and come together on and try to move this state and country in the right direction in that fashion.
Well, I think we'd both agree that the Keystone Pipeline should be built. It's an opportunity for jobs for people in our district, and I think that we have people with the technological expertise. We've got some of the smartest people in the world who should be able to figure out how to make sure that we do that and also protect the water in the aquifer. We also would agree, I think, on possibly on the mandate. It's something that the mandate, although you would do away with the health care reform bill altogether, pull it out by its roots, I think you said. But the mandate is something that I don't necessarily think belongs in that bill. But I think we also, we both have enjoyed the company of good Labrador retrievers.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, and lots of them. The mandate portion, I just think it's important to point out that it can't be severed from the balance of Obamacare. It's either all in or it's all out. So we're not going to have that choice
to
be for it or against it. And Barack Obama has made it very clear, too, that they can't function without the mandate.
Well, there is a severability that was not included in this, right? So one piece, the whole bill falls.
I listened to the Supreme Court arguments on that particular case, and it really was a nightmare to hear about.
Now, one of the things that I noticed when I was doing my homework for the debate is that on your campaign website, Mrs. Vilsack, you list your plan for dealing with health care. Now, in it, what some call Obamacare, what is the Affordable Care Act. You say the following things. The Affordable Care Act does not do enough to protect Iowans from unreasonable premium increases. Its plan regarding prescription drug prices, you say prohibiting Medicare from negotiating prescription drug prices is unnecessary and increase the costs to American seniors. And you also say the tax credits for small businesses in the Affordable Care Act do not do enough to encourage small businesses to offer employee health insurance coverage. So with that many imperfections in the Affordable Care Act, don't you think maybe Congressman King's idea of scrapping it, start over, build a good plan is better than just kind of tinkering around the edges?
Not at all. I think it's a great place to begin. We need to do a lot of work on it, and really the issue that we most need to work on is cost containment. And I will talk about that, but if we did what Congressman King is talking about, we'd never move forward because he's just interested in moving us backward. He wants to go backward. I don't know what he wants to go backward to exactly, but he just wants to scrap the whole Affordable Care Act and pull it out by its roots. But I'd like to know what he's going to put in that hole after he pulls it out by its roots, because he doesn't have a suggestion for something to put in its place. We need to work on cost containment, and I have suggested that we don't necessarily need a mandate. It's not really fair to tell people that they have to buy insurance if they can't afford it. But I think the most important part in my list of good ideas on my website, which everybody can take a look at ChristyVilsack for Iowa.com, because I have 7 or 8 good ideas that I'd like to put on the table. But the most important one is that in the Affordable Care Act, and as we proceed to talk about how we're going to pay for health care, we need to make sure that we move to a coordinated care model or community care model, which would pay not for services, but would pay for results. And right now in Iowa, that's really happening already. Our major health care concerns are moving to a coordinated care model. And when I talked to the governor of Oregon not too long ago, who was a doctor, he said that he thinks he can save in his state as much as $4 trillion by moving to a coordinated care model. And
explain that a little bit more, what that means to our listeners.
Basically, you've heard people talk about a medical home. You've heard it's about, let me do it this way. We want to make sure that we keep somebody from having 3 knee replacements in their lifetime, and rather they only maybe have 1 knee replacement. So it's a preventative care model, and prevention is a really important word. We're paying and rewarding healthcare providers for keeping people out of their clinics. It may be counterintuitive to think about it at first, but that's what we need to do. We need to make sure we reward results, not just adding all sorts of services together. And that is probably the crux of how we can really get to making sure that we start finding the savings. If we find the savings, then insurance companies will be able to offer a product that is affordable. And all the things that I listed are, a place to start. And I think the Affordable Care Act, people want to continue on. I don't think they want to throw it out. I think there are things that are happening. My car broke down on Interstate 35 not too long ago, and the young tow truck driver who towed me into Ames, I was talking to him and asking him how he was getting along. He was recently married, and he said, well, one of the good things was, because they didn't have much money, is that he got to stay on his parents' health care plan until he was 26. So he and his wife had a year to figure out what they were going to do for health care. So people like that part of the Affordable Care Act. They want to have the Affordable Care Act deal with pre-existing conditions. Seniors want to be able to buy prescription drugs that are affordable. So there are it's a good place to start, and we need to keep working on it. And I want to go to Congress to make some of the decisions that we'll need to make about making it better.
Congressman King? There's a lot to talk about there.
If the governor from Oregon can save $4 trillion from his budget on any kind of a health care plan, we should all go take a real good look at that, and I don't know why we'd hold back on adoption of it. Just repealing Obamacare only saves $2.4 trillion, and that's an important part of getting to a balanced budget. So that's an astonishing number to me, $4 trillion in Oregon, but that's news to me too. So it's something one of those other things that I've learned about throughout this campaign that I need to go back and check on. Here's the thing that I'm also surprised that the opposition research didn't discover the alternatives that I've talked about for about 2.5 or 3 years. But I am one or two lead opponents to Obamacare in the nation. I had the first draft to repeal Obamacare. It's not 2,700 pages long. It's only 40 words. It ends up with these words, as if it had never been enacted, close quote. And that makes it real simple. And if there are redeeming qualities to Obamacare, we can put them back in after the fact. But we cannot let it grow back from the roots on us by trying to tweak it around the edges. It's bad for a lot of reasons. And I could take you down through a list of those. But I think by now Americans understand, and Iowans understand, what's bad about Obamacare. First of all, it's unaffordable. It's unsustainable. We can't afford it. It will reduce research and development. It will result in people waiting for service. There's an independent payment advisory board that's incorporated into Obamacare that are 15 unelected bureaucrats that will make the decisions on people's health care, intervening between the doctor and the patient with the federal government. I can add all of that up for you and tell you how bad that is. But there's another component that I don't think that we're talking about very much here in Iowa that I want people to think about, and that is this. Today, we make our own health care decisions. We go to the doctor, we have our discussion, we decide on our health insurance policy, or we look for a job where we can decide on our health insurance policy. But when you take that away from people, think what happens to America a generation from now when the kids grow up and they don't realize that there was a time when we could make our own health care decisions, when this vigorous, independent, God-given, liberty-blessed people in the country and in the upper Midwest and in Iowa can make those decisions to manage our own health and our own health care. We need to preserve that. If we do not, America's potential is forever diminished because our vigor is sapped, the dependency class in America is expanded, and that is the strategy of the people on the other side of the aisle. But here are the things that I would do in the aftermath of the full 100% repeal of Obamacare. Pull it out by the roots, as Christy said. The first thing that I would do, provide for selling insurance across state lines. When Barack Obama made the proposal, he wanted to add a federal health insurance company to compete against our health insurance companies. We had 1,300 health insurance companies in America at the time. We had over 100,000 possible policy varieties for people to choose from. You just couldn't go and buy a policy from Kentucky or New Jersey, but a typical policy for a young man in New Jersey would be about $6,000 a year then, and a typical policy for a young man in good health in Kentucky would be about $1,000 a year. Why not let that young man in New Jersey buy a policy out of Kentucky, repeal the McCarran-Ferguson component of this so that we can sell insurance across state lines? That's number one, and that'll do the most to cut down on the cost and give us still empower ourselves as individuals. Second, the full 100% deductibility of everybody's health insurance policies out there and legitimate health care costs. There's no reason for a corporation to have that advantage to be able to deduct that going in, and an individual not be able to do that. Then the tort reform component of this, which we passed out of the House several times, and it is something that there's a number that's pretty close to $208 billion a year that's wrapped up in the lawsuit abuse and the defensive medicine that's part of that. And you want people to have portability. There are a whole list of solutions to come along the way, but we should not write up a big bill in a closed room somewhere because Republicans are going to have the majority in the Senate and the House and the presidency. We should bring them one at a time in the full light of day. Let everybody in Iowa and everybody in America debate each one of those components and pass them one at a time until we get the solutions in place that protect the freedom and the individual choice of our people in this state and country.
Well,
Gary?
Yes, go ahead.
He talks and he talks and he talks, and they've brought to the floor to vote against the Affordable Care Act over and over and over again. But I think the congressman's time would be better spent balancing the budget. When he came into office, the debt was $6 trillion, and now it's $14 to $16 trillion, and he's had 10 years to take care of balancing this budget, and he hasn't done it. He basically voted for 2 wars, which he didn't pay for, and he voted for Medicare Part D, which he didn't pay for, and then he gave tax cuts to people who make over $1 million. And I think he needs to talk a little bit about why he can't get into a room and balance a budget. We did it in the 90s without affecting education, without taking anything away from Social Security, and he hasn't balanced the budget, and I think he should speak to that.
Congressman King, 2 wars unpaid for, balancing the budget. I'll let you respond to that.
Well, I walked into Congress, and one of the first things I did in the first few weeks I was there, I went to find the chairman of the Budget Committee, and I said, "Where's our balanced budget?" His answer was, "We can't balance the budget. We've been attacked on September 11th. We watched our financial industry come to a screeching halt. We have to stand up TSA and all the other security that's going on. We're in war in Afghanistan. We're preparing to go into a war into Iraq." That was the scenario that I was dealt with. I still went back to write that balanced budget, and I went in and got on the steering committee of the Republican Study Committee, and we brought balanced budgets out of the Republican Study Committee multiple times, and it was because I drove it from inside that room to bring that out. And you can look and see that. If you want to talk about, first of all, I want to make an objection here. When we're going into war, you don't go back and check your checkbook. When you put Americans in harm's way, you make sure they have the resources to do their job. They are warriors and they are noble people, and they're sacrificing for us. You don't hold back. You don't pinch those pennies. You give them everything that they need. And the Medicare Part D, that was a wise decision on my part and those that voted for it. It came in 41% under budget. It has saved hundreds of billions of dollars. We just can't quantify them because it saved arms and legs and amputations from people that were not getting their insulin because they didn't have the insurance to get their prescription drugs. That's just one example. It goes on and on and on. You have to make the prudent decisions, and then of course you have to know that somebody's going to want your job and attack you for them. But this balance that we're looking at now, $16 trillion, this is Barack Obama, over $5 trillion of that added on his watch in 3+ years, moving on very close to 4 years now. And he has added to this deficit more than twice as much. And I would say also, in the middle of the war, in the height of the war of Iraq, we came within $160 billion of balancing the budget. And President Obama offered a $1.33 trillion deficit spending budget, and the Senate hasn't passed one in some 1,200 days. So that's what we're looking at. Oh, and I would add also, in 10 votes, that my staff I said, here's some things off the top of my head that I voted for that would move us towards balance, that would be a lot more fiscally responsible. They put them together and did the research. In 10 votes, it saved $17+ trillion from our spending. And if the rest of Congress had followed my lead, we not only would have a balanced budget for multiple years in a row, we'd have paid off our national debt.
Congressman King, you've been in Congress for 10 years, and the budget is not balanced. What have you done? What have you done?
I've just said what I've done, and I've also explained that there are 435 people there. And so we have a president who's driving the spending, and we have people from across this country, people on the left side of the aisle that are driving the spending and growing the dependency class in America continually because it empowers them politically. And I think it's disingenuous for people to drive that kind of an agenda for their own political well-being. You know, and where would the liberals take us? If you would give them their whole wish list, where would they take us in this country? What would this country look like? It would be in the end, it would be the nationalization of our economy. It'd be swallowed up. We'd be one huge Greece. And by the way, if Barack Obama is reelected as president, that's what we will be. If you do the math and project that out, the deficits that he's delivering to us even now, with some Republicans in the House slowing it down, but not doing enough as far as I'm concerned, we would be one huge Greece, and there's nobody in the world that could bail us out if they wanted to. We've got to get this under control ourselves, and I don't think we've heard a plan to balance the budget from my competition. And I've laid one out, and I've voted for it, and it's real clear. One
of the things I wanted to just to touch on, the fact is you talk as though the Republicans operated in control of the Congress all during this period. We have a Democratic Senate, and for a period of time, Democrats control both the House and the Senate in the period that you're talking about. So in all fairness to Congressman King, the Senate blocked many things that could have balanced the budget. Now, what I wanted to ask was, how do you think we should ensure that Congress balances the budget? Obviously, we have a divided Congress at this time. Senate controlled by Democrat, Republicans control the House. Do we need a constitutional amendment to change the Constitution to require a balanced budget, like the state of Iowa has, what Iowans are used to?
Well, Congressman King would suggest that, but I think that's just a gimmick. I think
Why is it a gimmick for Congress and not for the state of Iowa?
Let me just go back and explain that. I think that we balance the budget by making sure that we find a balance, that we look for targeted spending, that we have targeted cuts, and we ask people who pay more than $1 million or make more than $1 million to pay a little bit more. Congressman King suggests that we have a balanced budget amendment, but it would take at least 4 years. It might never get passed. And by his own, he says that it might take as much as 10 years. We can't wait that long for a balanced budget. He's been in Congress for 10 years. His job is to balance the budget. And I'm simply asking why it's not balanced. And I think that this election will have a lot to do with temperament. And I think if we want to get anything done in the future in Congress, that we're going to have people who are willing to get into a room and are willing to compromise. Okay. And I think that's a strength I bring to it. I don't think Congressman King is capable of getting into a room and compromising with people.
We are now in our final moments, so I'm going to let both of you give your final statements. We're kind of pressed for time, so it'll be about 1.5 minutes apiece. So I'll start with you, Mrs. Vilsack.
Okay. Thank you. Congressman King and I obviously see this job differently. I see the job very locally, and he sees it through a Washington lens. He sees it as a way to promote himself and an ideology that has nothing to do with economic opportunity in the new 4th District. Congressman King cares more about the rich than the interests of the middle-class Iowans, and he's one of the nation's leading advocates for the so-called fair tax, which would basically tax us by 23%. That is going to be devastating to middle-class families who will be paying more at the grocery store, paying more for their medications, who will be paying $1 more for a gallon of milk when they go to the grocery store. He voted for an increase in payroll taxes and voted for a budget that would cost seniors about $6,400 more out of pocket every year for their health care costs. And he even criticized millions of people, retirees in America, for not working until they're 74 years old. You know, I see Congress on the first day sort of like I or my 39 counties on the first day, the way I would see my students on the first day of school, with all the promise that includes. And that I want to go to Congress to make sure that I help each one of those counties and each one of those towns and the people in there maximize their potential. And, the way I see it, that every one of these counties, every one of these cities, all of the people in this district are like my friends and neighbors. And these towns are like my hometown, and I want to go to Congress to represent all of them. So thank you very much.
And Congressman King.
Well, I guess I'm glad I'm going last here. All those allegations, many of them just completely and plainly untrue, but you can find them on the left-wing websites. Most of them are generated there, and they're all rebuttable. I just ask people, go look there, and you'll see that. But I do want to speak to the fair tax because Mike Huckabee won the Iowa caucus, in a large part because of his support for the fair tax. What goes on there is this. The federal government has the first lien on all productivity in America. Ronald Reagan said that what you tax, you get less of. It shuts down productivity. We give people 56% more in their paycheck. This is good for middle class, especially good for lower class. My background, meeting payroll for 28 plus years, starting a business, raising a family, living here. My roots are here. And Gary, no matter what happens in the election, I'm going to be living in the 4th District after November.
Well, we thank you both for being a part of this debate, and thank you for listening. Hope you got some information from both of these candidates in their first matchup, and we'll continue to report on the politics of this 2012 election right here on News Radio 1040 WHO. For the WHO Radio News team, I'm Gary Barrett. Have a good night.